to the Covenant Eyes podcast. So good to have you joining us again. I'm Karen, one of the hosts, and I've got Rob Stoddard joining me, sitting shotgun over there. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing good. Hello, hello.
Yes, we are. We're having a talk today with a guest who represents an organization that we have loved and adored for a long time. So I'm super excited about this conversation. How about you, Rob?
Oh, absolutely. I've been a fan of this organization for years and years, and so we're just really thankful to have him with us today. So let me start. Our guest today is Adam Holz from Plugged In from Focus on the Family. Adam's been at Plugged In for over 20 years, and he is the site director for Plugged In. And so, why don't we start there? One,
Yeah.
Adam, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Rob and Karen, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Great, great. Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, Adam, tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up at Plugged In and what you do there. And for our one listener who might not know what Plugged In is, why don't you give us a little bit of background on that too?
Yeah, well, let me give you the super short version. The super short version is one word, that's God, but you probably want a few more details. I actually had my first stint at Plugged In 1996 and 97, and I've bounced back and forth between Focus on the Family and the Navigators. So I was at the Navigators for about 10 years on either side of that first short stint, and I've been back here at Plugged In since 2004. And the relational connection that led me to Plugged In the first place is a longer story than we need to go into. But suffice it to say that I've always had an interest in discipleship, in teaching, and in pop culture, and Plugged In is a perfect fit for the intersection of all of those things. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Plugged In, we actually started as a very humble 4-page newsletter way back in 1991. Bob DeMoss was the initiator of that, and the initial focus was on music. We launched our website, pluggedin.com, in 1999. And up to that point, I would say we had been more focused on popular culture and music and some of those things than we were movies, but it became quickly apparent that with the responsiveness and ability to deal with things, so quickly, comparing a print publication to the internet, that movies very quickly became our bread and butter. And so that is what we're probably best known for today. We review most of the wide release and most of the independent movies that are out there these days. And the ones that have a really, really high degree of sexual content, sometimes we will pass on those. We didn't do Saltburn recently, for example. And if you've never been to Plugged In, our way of reviewing it is not so much artistic or aesthetic, although we will touch on that, as much as it is really focusing on what's the content and what are the worldview and philosophical and theological concerns that you'll want to be aware of. And Focus on the Family is obviously a Christian ministry, so we're coming at it from that worldview perspective. But even if that's not where you're coming from personally, we'll still tell you about, sexual content, profanity, drug and alcohol use, violence, those sorts of things. So whatever your particular pain points are for your family, hopefully we'll give you the information you need to make a good decision. And then we do the same thing, not only with movies, but with TV, with books, music, video games, YouTube channels. And increasingly, we're helping people navigate technology as well.
That's incredible. And I'll tell you, as a user of the website and the content throughout my children's, years growing up, and even as an adult, I mean, my husband and I, we still use it because, when you're going out to a theater to see a movie, you don't want any surprises. So as a Christian, your organization, your site has been instrumental in helping make good choices that honor God. We don't want to be, we really don't want to be engaging in culture that is not reflecting who Christ is in this world. And so I'm just thankful for it. So I'm a big fan. And if you haven't checked out this organization, listeners, you must. It is incredible. They have the video games was super helpful to me as a parent because of course I wasn't going to sit and play Call of Duty or Halo myself to figure it all out. You guys were providing feedback on what was in those games. So I appreciate that as a parent. So thank you.
Well, let me just reflect on one thing. Our primary focus is on equipping parents and families. But what you say is absolutely right in that a lot of the things that we review don't necessarily fall in the purview of things that kids are necessarily going to gravitate towards. So it's kind of both and. We are especially there for parents, but we have a lot of people who are not necessarily in that target demographic who use us as well. So in that sense, we're there for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Adam, being there for 20 years, I'm sure you have seen quite a change maybe in our
Yeah.
entertainment industry. Can you get some background, some insight on how you've seen things change and kind of where we're at now and what's your perspective on that?
Well, in some ways, the easiest way to answer that question, Rob, is just to talk about the technological evolution and revolution. When I started in 2004, uh, YouTube was either just started or hadn't even launched yet. Facebook didn't exist. People had only been buying iPods and using iTunes for a couple of years. There were no smartphones. So we were still buying CDs when we reviewed music every week. We would send somebody to the store to buy 3 or 4 CDs. Same with video games. And we actually had, you'll appreciate this, and some of you of a certain tender age will get a good chuckle out of this. We had 24 different DVRs, and we taped or we recorded 24 cable channels constantly so that we could review things. So, obviously we were pre-streaming. Netflix, ironically, in the beginning wasn't really net at all. They sent you a DVD in the mail. And
I
and so
remember.
things were relatively speaking, I think I still have a few that I haven't returned yet. They're up in the cupboard somewhere. Um, Ironically, things were very much more analog and more physical, and really starting right around 2004, 2005, we get the iTunes and Apple revolution that was really the precursor to the iPhone, which was the precursor to smartphones. Well, obviously iPhones are smartphones, but that was the beginning of the transformation from still using physical format and still primarily watching things when they were aired. Or yeah, maybe you had a TiVo. I don't even know if TiVo still exists, honestly. But I TiVo'd it so you could time shift something and skip the commercials. Now everything's streaming, everything's on demand, everything is digital, and so that has happened. And concurrently, if I can say one other thing, right in the beginning of the 21st century, I would say it was the dying gasp of what some have called the monoculture, right? We all still shared a general sense of what was out there in the cultural ether. And with the explosion of streaming options, with the explosion of YouTube and self-generated content, came this incredible fragmentation and explosion in content. I think in 2020, Netflix had something like 500 or 600 scripted shows just on one outlet, right? And so I was born in 1970. I'm 53. I remember when we got Fox. I'm like, holy cow, a whole nother network. I remember when we got cable. Oh, there's 100 channels. But now it's functionally infinite. And so certainly we want to keep our finger on the pulse of the big things that are still garnering that attention. But we also want to train our kids to think for themselves, because there's no possible way that we as parents can know everything that's out there.
That's a really good point. We're big here at Covenant Eyes talking about intentional parenting. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about is, that applies to not only the choices we make with the technology that we give our children, but the cultural pieces as well, movies, TV, streaming, video games. We have to be training them, because there's going to be a day where we're not going to be there and they have to make those choices for themselves. So I love that. I love intentional parenting.
Yeah. We use the words intentionality and engagement, because those two things go hand in hand. As parents, intentionality has to do with the choices we're actually making, but the engagement piece is we're not only being wise about the choices we're making, but we're stepping into our kids' worlds or inviting them to think about what we're watching, what we're listening to, what we're gaming, what we're engaging with on social media. And so that training process is happening so that the time they leave, when they're 18, 19, 20, 25, 30, somewhere in there, they're not just practicing those discernment skills for the first time, but hopefully they've had a chance to really think critically and we believe biblically with us so that they can continue to grow in that on their own.
Yeah, that is so important. And I don't envy being a parent nowadays. I mean, when I'm even a little older than you, Adam, when we raised our kids, there weren't all those choices and there wasn't all that self-made content, which no one really has screened or knows what's in that. And so I really feel for the parents today trying to really get a handle on that. So you guys work with parents and talk with parents, I assume, quite often about these issues. What are some advice you have for parents and really trying to keep a handle on all of this media and keep it all sorted out for their families?
Well, wow. I mean, we could talk for the next 6 hours about that. But let me say, I think that building on this theme of intentionality, our kids are growing up in a world where it's just standard operating procedure to have a device, to have communication with their friends that way. That said, I think the longer you can delay your kids getting a smartphone for the first time, and the longer you can delay their engagement with social media, the more it gives them an opportunity to grow and to develop those the skills that they need to navigate those worlds well. Now, once you are in that realm, once you've sort of crossed the Rubicon, you want to use the parental control features that are on phones. Obviously, Covenant Eyes is a service that provides a layer of protection, using whatever filters you deem are necessary to help keep your kids away from the content that is going to be harmful. Now, I will also say, I think in some ways it's maybe more important when they're younger with that inadvertent exposure, because I think if you think that you've completely done your job just because you're using parental controls and filtering software, there's a false sense of security there. Don't let that, very intentional choice to use filtering software be the end point. That's really just the beginning. And I think as they grow through their teen years, giving them more agency, giving them a chance to make those decisions, and then talking with them. My 17-year-old comes to me and says, "Dad, can I go see Cocaine Bear?" I mean, this happened, right? Okay. It's about a bear that eats cocaine. But I go to Plugged In. I go to our website. I'm like, all right, it doesn't have any crazy sexual stuff. You're 17. I'm going to give you the freedom to make that decision, but we're going to talk about it afterwards, right? And there are parents who may not have greenlighted that, but especially as your teens get into those middle teen years, I think we have to move out of the hovering sort of protective zone into, okay, I'm going to let you make some of your own decisions, but I want to keep those lines of communication open so that we're talking about stuff. And that, I think, equips them moving into adulthood. They've seen what that process looks like.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that's really in line with a lot of what we do here with parents, helping them to navigate technology. What is, I can't imagine, you must have a huge team that sits and goes through all of this content. I mean, what is it like to be one of those people that has to sit and watch all these movies and shows and then write reviews? Have you done some of that work yourself just to get a feel for it? And what is that like?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been here for 20 years. So I was a staff writer, and, I've done almost everything we do. At this point, I couldn't run our social media single-handedly. But we actually have a relatively small team. We have a team of 5, and I'm the director of that department. And all of us review things. All of us write things. We all still review movies. I review fewer things than I used to, but I'm kind of a pinch hitter in terms of if we have a need or If we have a particularly sensitive issue that we want to deal with, obviously the LGBT issues in our culture are a huge continual issue and theme that we wrestle with, and oftentimes I get those particular movies. But people ask, how do you sit and watch those things? How do you absorb those things and deal with it? And I think a couple of things. We all go with a notebook and a flashlight and a pad of paper. And I will take, if I'm watching a movie, sometimes 50 to 75 pages of notes. Now, there might only be, 10 lines of stuff on each page, and I have to go back and sort of reconstruct it from context, what I actually wrote down. But we're writing constantly. And so I really think of what we're doing as almost a kind of cultural anthropology, right? We're looking, and we're really striving to be as objective as possible in terms of cataloging that content that we're seeing. And then we have to walk the really weird tightrope of giving people enough information that they know what's in something, but not writing it in a way that's salacious or graphic. And that's especially difficult with sexual content. And, we get letters from people on both sides. It's like, oh, you said this was, a really explicit scene, but I didn't know how explicit it was. I wish you would have given more detail. And sometimes we get letters from parents. It's like, too much detail, we have to be careful with these reviews. And so we try to walk that line between describing very passively and very boringly, especially with sexual content, here's what you can expect, but not doing it in such a way that it becomes problematic in and of itself. And then after the fact, we spend a lot of time talking with each other. We pray with each other. And the very fact that we're reviewing as much content as we do, stuff doesn't sit there very long because it gets forced out. Most of the people on our team are writing 1 or 2 pieces a day. And so that process just sort of flushes that content down the pipe, if you will, so we can deal with more of it. And I think that we have a sense that God has called us to do this. It's a weird job, right? It's not for everyone, but we do our best to really capture that information and equip people with what they need to make the best decisions for their families.
So, Adam, here's just kind of a fun question. So this last year, give us 2 or 3 movies that were your favorites that you would highly recommend to people to watch.
Oh boy, I should always be prepared for this question. I'm going to give you a couple of very different movies. I don't know that I would recommend everybody watch it, but I was really deeply moved by The Sound of Freedom. And that's a movie about sexual trafficking. It's not at any point sexually explicit, but certainly there are things that are suggested that are deeply disturbing. And I think it really gives a sense of at least how one expression of that issue in our culture and our world, what it looks like. And so I think that I love it when we get a chance to review movies that are really sounding the alarm on things that are hard. Now, on the other end of the spectrum completely, my team teases me because somehow I missed It's a Wonderful Life. And we have been going back through our classics, and we're starting to review more classic movies. We're starting to go through the AFI, American Film Institute, top movies of all time. And I got to review It's a Wonderful Life about a month ago. So that was really a fun experience. And I got to see Jesus Revolution earlier this year, which I thought was sort of a remarkable movie that pictured that season in American culture. It's about the Jesus movement in the early 70s, and Kelsey Grammer stars in that. That movie was done by John and Andy Irwin. So that was another one that I really enjoyed. And just in the guilty pleasure category of films that probably are not going to get a full plugged in seal of approval, I enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I'm a comic book guy. I still like comic book movies. It seems like the quality has sort of gone downhill, but and that's one of the things that we have to deal with even working at Plugged In, is trying to distinguish between our personal opinions and what Plugged In needs to say about something. So sometimes at church, people ask me, what'd you think of this? I'm like, okay, do you want the plugged in opinion? Do you want my personal opinion? And
Yeah.
sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're slightly different. But those are a few things. Actually, one other movie that I saw and reviewed that is so far under the radar, I would be surprised if you even heard about it. It was called Mother Teresa and Me. And it was about a woman in England who ends up unexpectedly pregnant in sort of a crisis of life. She has Indian heritage, and she goes to Calcutta and visits Mother Teresa's ministry in present day. And it's also interwoven with Mother Teresa's story. And she wrestled a lot with doubt in her relationship with God. I really enjoyed it. And that would be one that would definitely be worth looking up.
Nice. I have not heard of that one, so I'll have to check that out. Thank you for sharing that list. And, as we bring today's episode to a close, we don't get nearly enough time. Our podcast episodes are like 20 minutes long, so we're going to have you back and maybe do a deep dive on some of the features of Plugged In, and maybe even, walk people through some of the other stuff going on at Focus on the Family. In closing, as we think about culture, and obviously Covenant Eyes is very committed to helping people address pornography addiction and never start using pornography in our families. As you think about the culture and where things are, and if you had one piece of advice to give families out there that are listening, what would that be?
Well, I want to riff on that. And my kids are 13, 15, and 17. So my wife and I got married a little bit late, had our first one at 36. And I think the sexuality issue in our culture, regardless of whether you're coming from a Christian perspective or not, it's the issue in our culture right now. And I think as parents, it can be uncomfortable as our kids start to come into that time where it's time to start talking about it. You've got to be having conversations about sexuality because our culture is having that conversation, whether we want it to or not, whether we're comfortable with it or not. And our culture has things to say about sexuality that may not line up with where you are at as a family, whether you're coming from a Christian perspective or another, maybe a culturally more conservative perspective. We've got to wade into that. And so my kids and I, we talk about sex stuff all the time because that's where our culture's at, but to the point which it's normal, right? It's not weird. It's not, oh, mom and dad want to talk about sex again, but just the purpose and place of this incredible gift that God has given us in our lives. We want to be able to talk about that because the culture is having that conversation. So I think that would be the lesson, or the thing I would want to impart is have those conversations to the point where it's an ongoing dialogue, not just a one-off thing. When we were growing up, maybe our parents thought they could get away with checking that box once and it was one and done, but we don't live in that world anymore.
That's excellent advice. Oh my goodness. Rob, you want to bring it home for today?
Yeah, definitely. Amen on that one. We're definitely aligned with that conversation, with the things we're dealing with or helping families and people deal with. So for sure. Adam, we will definitely drop your website and that information in our show notes, but
Great.
Just for reference, where do people find more information about Plugged In?
You can come to pluggedin.com, and we also have a weekly podcast, thepluggedinshow.com. And we, of course, are a ministry of Focus on the Family.
Absolutely. Well, great. Like I said, we'll drop that in the show notes, but we thank you so much for joining us. Big fans of Focus on the Family we are, and we just love the conversation today. And like Karen said, we hope to have you back here another time. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us and listening. And again, click that like and share button, and we'll look for the next time.